Senator Eggleston.
Thank you, Mr President. My question is to the Minister for Indigenous Affairs, Senator Scullion. And it is, will the Minister outline to the Senate the government's approach to meeting the closing gap targets, including initiatives contained in the recent budget?
The Minister for Indigenous Affairs, Senator Scullion.
Thank you, Mr President, and can I thank Senator Eggleston for his continued interest in this matter, and particularly for his constituents in Western Australia. The Coalition has targeted funding into the priorities of getting kids to school, adults into work and community safety. But it's not about the dollars, it's actually about getting results. I was astounded by the Leader of the Opposition's what I would consider disingenuous remarks in his piece in The Australian today, and stating that this government has betrayed Indigenous Australians. I think it appears to have been lost on the Leader of the Opposition for all the billions invested and the chest beating and this is how much money we've spent, so it must have been fixed, that reducing disadvantage amongst Indigenous Australians, particularly in remote areas over the past 6 years, has simply escaped you. You have failed. On any measure, the most recent Closing the Gap report says it all. Unemployment targets, backwards. NAPLAN targets, backwards. School attendance, over the 5 years, some 15% backwards. So if I seem a bit galled, it's just very difficult to be lectured to by somebody who's failed so monumentally in this particular area. We've reviewed the programs, we're streamlining the programs to reduce duplication without reducing our effort on the ground. And our budget measure does in fact include some new spending measures. We've announced a new target to close the gap on school attendance, and I'm delighted to say in May, COAG agreed to the new target. All jurisdictions, particularly the communities, are working fantastically together and with government to that end. The school attendance strategy, whilst we would have in a different day said it cost a bit over $46 million, we're not interested in saying that anymore. What I am interested in reporting to the chamber is that it's lifted school attendance in the Northern Territory this year compared with last year.
Order.
The number of
Time
kids
has
attending school
expired for answering the question. Time's expired. Senator Eggleston.
I have a supplementary question, Mr President, and the question is the Minister aware of any alternative approaches to meeting the Closing the Gap target?
The Minister.
Well, Mr President, certainly as I travel around communities, the common refrain is, can we just get out of these sort of 6-month programs that go nowhere? They tell me they've got more pilots than Qantas, and they've got quite enough of that. They want a real investment in the future. So we need a new engagement with Indigenous people that doesn't mean counting the dollars. It's all about real outcomes on the ground. The funding benchmarks at present are mostly about process instead of results. We now have a Prime Minister that's made our Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander affairs front and centre of our national policy. His approach and his leadership of our approach is that it's a results-based approach rather than telling everyone how much money you've spent and hoping for a result.
Senator Eggleston.
Thank you, Mr President. And a second supplementary question. Can the Minister advise the Senate of the degree of any bipartisanship in terms of support for the government's approach to closing the gap?
The Minister.
Thank you, Mr President. I have to say I read the Leader of the Opposition's contribution in The Australian with some concern. I guess there is a whole broad range of interpretations you can give it. Being an optimist, I'm hoping that this was just something that had to be done. The party machine said, listen, we need to sort of shake up this bipartisanship. So I'm hoping that he hasn't stepped to the line, and certainly that's not what I read, that he stepped beyond the line and says, listen, we haven't walked away from bipartisanship, but I haven't seen an article that went as close to that. I appeal and I call on the Leader of the Opposition and those opposite to work with government in the same way that all the communities are working with government, the COAG's working with this government, to ensure that we have real outcomes on the ground for our first Australians. And I think it's in that enterprise and that endeavour that you will endear them to you as they have endeared themselves to us and our efforts.